Or to our rapporteur for 4 minutes. Mr. Albrecht, please.
Dear Chair, Commissioner, Presidency, dear colleagues, this is a historical breakthrough. For the first time in history, the United States of America are entering into a binding international agreement on data protection standards. This House has asked for such an agreement between the EU and the United States for years, and finally we'll have it. So what's the agreement about? First, it establishes a comprehensive framework of data protection, principles, safeguards and rights when personal data is transferred for criminal enforcement, law enforcement purposes between the EU and the US. Those protection standards are not only applying when law enforcement authorities exchange information, but also when private entities transfer data to law enforcement authorities, for example, European airlines to the US Department of Homeland Security under the PNR agreement. Second, this framework does not only cover EU-US agreements, but also bilateral data transfer agreements between the EU member states and the United States. This is a huge success, which hasn't been clear from the beginning because member states resisted the inclusion of bilateral deals. It finally was included because the European Parliament has consistently asked for it as one of the conditions for giving consent to such an agreement. Third, the agreement establishes a right to judicial redress for EU citizens in front of US courts in case they think their rights under this agreement have been not respected. It was again the heavy pressure from the European Parliament which in the end made clear that the US need to open up their judicial redress avenues to EU citizens in order to restore mutual trust. Earlier this year, the US Congress amended the Privacy Act in order to do this. I'm not sure how often it has happened in history that the US Congress, which had a hard time agreeing on anything in recent years, has changed US law because we have asked them to do so. It is also important to clarify what the agreement is not about. The umbrella agreement is not a data transfer agreement. Article 1 clearly specifies that the agreement cannot be a legal base for any transfer of personal data, and that a separate legal base shall always be required. The umbrella agreement does not limit any individual rights. On the contrary, it increases the level of data protection where data are being transferred already today. And we now made it crystal clear. If the US side restricts the rights under this agreement, the EU authorities can consider the US not delivering sufficient safeguards for data protection enshrined in this agreement and suspend data transfers. This now is all clarified in the Commission's declaration to the agreement, which I share and which will be published together with the agreement, so it will guide any legal interpretation. The uncertainty of the incoming Trump administration is just one more reason to conclude the agreement while President Obama is still in office. If we conclude this agreement, the United States will be bound by international law, which gives unconditional data protection rights. There are motions on the table to refer the agreement to the Court of Justice. And even though I'm convinced, after the intense discussions with our legal service, the Commission, data protection authorities and other experts, that the agreement is good enough and fully complies with EU law, I have no problem voting in favour of this request, if doubts remain with some of the groups. But let me be clear. This agreement is a huge step forward for fundamental rights and in particular for the right to data protection in times where data exchange is key for effective law enforcement cooperation between the EU, its member states and other partners in the world. With the umbrella agreement, we will restore trust in the effective protection of personal data as a precondition for better law enforcement information exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I invite Commissioner Jourová to take the floor.
Madam President, honourable members, the umbrella agreement on which you are asked to cast your vote tomorrow is of great importance for the protection of all Europeans whenever their personal data are transferred